Tech Tip Tuesday. Hey, thanks for watching. This is Tech Tip Tuesday. We get suggestions all the time. Can you show us this? Can you show us that? And sometimes we have some good ideas and things that we want to pass on to you. What we're working on today is, actually this came from one of the comments, one of the previous episodes, where somebody wanted a demonstration on how to do a proper rosette weld or a plug weld. And that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to show you, since I'm in the middle of a big welding project on the garbage Camaro, I'm going to show you how I get ready for a welding session. A couple of things to talk about right from the start. Make sure that whenever you're welding, you're using proper PPE. There is UV light coming off of the welding arc, so if it's at all possible, don't have any exposed skin. Of course, you want to wear a welding helmet and make sure that you've got this part of your neck covered up if possible. I've got jackets and things like that, and it kind of sucks to get that sunburn down there. So let's talk about metal. This is the gauge of sheet metal that we're using on the Camaro. This literally came from the floor pan, and it's a 20 gauge piece of steel. This is an 18 gauge piece of steel. You can see the difference in the thickness right there. This is exactly the two thicknesses of metal that we're mating together with the trunk floor to the frame rails. So this is what I want to do my setup on. The secret of success with me with welding is to make sure that I'm not guessing at anything. It's like painting. You don't want to guess at anything. So what I want to do is set up a bit of a rehearsal. These scrap pieces are perfect for that. This is trimming that I took off of the panel, and I'm going to set up a scenario right here. As a matter of fact, I've got a couple of different things that we're going to set up. Two things are happening with this particular project. We've got rosette welds on the same gauge steel and rosette welds on a heavy versus a thicker gauge of steel. These are the two setups here. Same, heavier, thinner. The biggest thing that I can pass on to you is to practice and do a rehearsal. That's really important. It helps you set up your machine. It helps you set up your mindset. It helps you set up the fact that your PPE is doing what it needs to do, that you got enough welding gas in your machine. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to prepare. We don't just turn the machine on and start welding. There's settings to deal with on the machine that we can preset and make sure that the machine is going to do what it's supposed to do without us having to think about it or second guess it. Almost every single welder has a guide on the back side here. We've got this guide right here. And although I might tweak my settings once I establish this, but this gives me a starting point. For instance, mild steel, yes. Right up here, 22 gauge through 3/16. We're 22 gauge right here, mild steel. So there's our wire speed and our voltage settings. 18 gauge, a little thicker, 118, 15.6, 15.5. So that's going to give me a range. 20 gauge is going to be somewhere between 22 and 18. So I might split the difference. I might go 110 and 16 volts on the front of my machine, which the settings are on the front of your machine, and not all welders are the same. This machine happens to have an automatic setting. It's called MIG in the ESAB Rebels. And what it does is it senses thickness and voltage and feeds it back into a microprocessor in the machine, and you don't have to set it manually. I'm not going to assume that you have a machine like that, so we're going to go through the manual settings and adjusting our weld pool to get a proper rosette. So we're going to start with some cleaning and some PPE and turning the machine on. A couple of do's and don'ts with the machine. Always, I'm going to say always here, make sure that when you're done using the machine, it's fully closed on the valve. When you open it up, don't just crack it open. This valve is a double sealed valve. You want to fully open it, because if you don't, it doesn't seat the seal in the top position, and you could lose expensive welding gas. So fully closed when you're not using it, fully open when you are using it. And then we can adjust the pressure according to the welding instructions and according to what works best for our particular project. Now, as far as this regulator goes, it's just that. It's a pressure regulator, and there's 2 gauges on it. This gauge lets you know how much is left in the tank, and this one lets you know how much you're allowing to flow in through your MIG wand. Typically, I'll set mine at 20. 18 to 23 is the typical setting recommendation. And like I said, again, if you're in a windy environment, maybe you want a little bit more, but that typically serves me very well. Here's the interesting thing. Just like when you're setting your spray gun pressure up, if you painters are out there are familiar with this, when you set your inlet pressure on your spray gun, you do it with the trigger pulled. Not necessarily with paint, but certainly with air coming through. And with this, you're going to waste a little bit of wire, so what? Pull your MIG wand and pull the trigger on it and then set your pressure, because this is a static pressure, that might be residual pressure, but your actual pressure needs to be set with your trigger pulled. If you're in an environment that there's a lot of wind, you might want a little bit more argon CO2 coming out, because that's the shielding gas. That's what's keeping your weld area and your heat affected zone pure, so you get a nice fusion without any contamination. If it's windy, if the air conditioner's on, if you've got a cooling fan blowing on you, you need to be aware of that you're not blowing all your shielding gas out of the way as well. We've got air conditioning in this shop. We don't have a breeze going, so I can have my gauge set in around 18 to 20 on this side here. And that gives me plenty of shielding gas, and I'm not wasting it. Another thing I want to mention is that in high school shop class, I practiced with a stick welder, and I understood the concept of welding and slag and all that type of stuff. Stick welding, although I've seen guys do amazing things with a stick welder and sheet metal, it's not my preferred method. I have much more control with a argon CO2 mix and a MIG welder. Flux core, I get this question a lot sometimes. Flux core welders, you don't need the shielding gas because the flux purifies the zone, but it's really kind of messy. And I find that I don't have the control that I need, especially in structural parts, to properly weld with flux core wire. So my recommendation is to always use a MIG welder, a wire-fed welder with an argon CO2 mix. Unless you're just a crackerjack with TIG welding, and then you probably know all this stuff anyways. So I'm going to assume that you're MIG welding when you're doing these plug welds. So we're going to suit up and burn some metal. So here's another fun fact for you. If you look inside this helmet, this is an ESAB Sentinel. It's a really good lid. It's got auto settings and it's adjustable. But if you look up in there, what do you see? You see reading lenses. That's right. It really helps to see what we're doing when we're welding. And even if you don't need reading glasses like I do, the amplified lenses can help you get a closer look into your welding surfaces and your two mating surfaces and allow you to read your weld pool a little bit better. So you might want to try that out. But it's been a really great thing ever since I discovered that I can weld better when I can actually see. So I've got my welder set up. I've verified the flow. It's where I want it set. I've got my wire speed at 110 and my voltage at 16. So now we're ready to start burning metal, right? This whole table is intended to be a surface where you can ground onto that, if you can use a magnetic ground, and then whatever you set onto the table, technically that creates your closed circuit. It's electrical welding, right? We need a closed circuit, and your circuit is as good as your ground, just like in automotive stuff. So what I recommend, rather than depending on a crazy dirty surface like this where I'm grounding here and I'm just assuming that I've got a complete closed circuit here, just for default, it doesn't hurt to ground to your actual substrate that you're welding. So that's the way we're going to default right now. You do you. I've always found that when I make sure and do my best practice stuff and make sure that I've got a good ground after my machine setup and all that type of stuff, typically it goes a little bit better. I don't know. So I've got some burnt wire that came out when I tested my setting for my regulator. Now, it's way too much stick out, so we're going to trim that off using these pliers. This is just a Leatherman, but what I like about it is that it gives me just about the exact 1/4 inch of stick out from the wand, and that's just about perfect for me to start. So I'm going to close the lid, just set a little zap. So it does zap, but when I'm looking at it, I'll just let that sit right there. When I'm looking at it, it's kind of stuttery, and if you look at the pool, it kind of stands up a little bit. You see that? You can see the ET head of the camera, but that kind of sticks up a little bit. I mean, so I'm going to turn the heat setting up just a little bit to try and melt that down just a little bit more, because I don't want that stand up. So I'm going to increase not the speed, but the voltage, because I've got enough wire, I've got enough stand up. I want a little bit more voltage, so I'm going to go to, oh, I don't know, 17.5. Try it again. And this is a practice piece, so I don't care if I make a mess. I'm going to weld on the back side. That, see how much better that sounded? Much better. Still popping a little bit. I'm going to increase my voltage a little bit more. I'm going to go to 19. And keep in mind this is 18 gauge. It's not 22 like the machine said. All right, so let's take a look at that weld pool. It's got some stand up, but it's fairly flat, and I'm real certain that we've got good penetration. You can really see the difference between that guy and those first two. Heat setting makes a huge difference, right? So now I'm going to actually practice creating a rosette weld. That's not bad, but look on the side. Look at this end of it. You can see I'm going to try and get around that light. You can see that I missed a place, right? So I want to talk about that. So I actually use a travel path when I'm doing a rosette weld. This is huge. This is a big, whatever. This was actually a test box for a training class I did. But I don't just weld and then make a big circle. I start in the middle, and I go to the edge, and then I travel. All the way around to the pool. So what I did on this ugly one, I didn't complete my circle. So when you're practicing, try that. Here's another one. I'll just set that on the floor. Start in the middle, go to the edge, and then go all the way around. And it's okay to trim your wire every time. Don't just assume the weld is going to eat up the rest of that wire. All right, here we go. That one looks pretty good. Good reason to wear gloves, so you can touch the molten metal. Don't do that. You can still see there's a little bit of a pocket right there at the edge, right? That's why we practice, folks. So if you look at these two, they're better. Oh, it looks better. Look at the edge. That edge is chewed up. There's a big hole. Look at this guy. I'm blowing through the outside edge. Why is that? So let's look at this one here. I'm set up to do that one, right? Look at the gap, man. Look at the gap. They're not clamped together. So That's warm. If you're just creating the scenario to where there's an enormous gap, and I want you to look at that, and I did that intentionally, you can see that gap, and you can see the result of that type of weld. The stand-up is too much on the pool. That's a nice, almost an undercut right there. It almost looks like a factory spot weld. But that is too much. I'm having to feed too much wire in to compensate for the lack of a contact patch. So here's a way to visualize that. And I learned this from Ron Covell in one of his seminars. If you take a lighter and you try and light a page, just paper, notebook paper, and try this, experiment with this. Take your lighter and light the middle, right in there. Count how many seconds it takes for it to ignite. Then, of course, blow it out and be safe and have a fire extinguisher. Hello? Then take your lighter and light the edge and see how long that takes to burn. Super interesting. It's a fraction of the time on the edge because we've allowed the molecules and the ignition to happen on an edge. Same thing with metal. If you allow that opportunity for extra oxygen, then you're going to end up with a blow-through, and you're going to end up with a weird, inconsistent joint. So this is nice practice. If nothing else, it was practice in order to see whether my machine is set up properly, which I think it is, and also we can see penetration. We can see the backside of that. We can see our heat affected zone, which is where the metal is blued, right up until where it starts to change color, and we can see that we're getting good penetration on those welds. So that's good, because this is dissimilar materials. That's, I'm going to say 18 and about 20, so that's a typical scenario on top of my framework. Now we're going to take a different approach right here. I've got more practice material set up. I've got my ground clamp grounded to the table and the substrate. I'm just going to make sure that I've got an even and consistent place where the metal joins the other metal. Now we practice more. If this seems like a lot of mucking about to practice, think about all the extra work you're going to have to do on crappy welds on your car. It's worth practicing. All right. Don't throw your wand on the floor. Don't even drop it. Here's one more thing to consider. See the space around the tip where the wire comes out? That's where your shielding gas comes out. If you weld up here, you're not going to get a whole lot of shielding gas on there. Shielding gas is absolutely necessary in order to get a really clean weld. We want a clean weld. Keep your wand close. So if you look at those guys, they're kind of terrible. This first one was fine. The rest of them, I'm missing a big chunk. I'm not going completely around in a circle. So I'm set up for another round of rosettes, but there's something else that I can do to improve my welding situation. I can get close enough. I've got good, even around that guy, I can get around that weld, but I think I'm missing that gap because I can't see. So what I'm going to do is make sure that I can see. So that right there, keep in mind we got a super dark welding helmet and some shadows and fire. So I'm going to light this up like the 4th of July and see if that helps me. So when I look at these welds, I can see room for improvement, but I also see success. Yeah, I missed a little hole there. I didn't complete my circle. And on the second one, no, I didn't complete my circle either. But look at the flatness of the weld pool, especially on the third one. That is what I call a successful plug weld, and it's going to work very nicely. Look at the heat affected zone around it. It's also circular, so I know that my travel is good. It's a good weld. So I've got it dialed in. So with 20 or 30 welds, I kind of got it dialed in. And I don't pretend to be a welding instructor. I'm not. I'm a paint instructor, but I'm not a welding instructor. But I've been welding automotive sheet metal for a long time, and I've figured out mostly what not to do and figured out some things that I think will help you. So I hope you got some good value out of some of these tips and techniques that I've shown you. And thank you for watching. We've got more tech tips coming your way, more tool reviews coming your way, and I just want to say I appreciate you very much for watching Paintucation by Kevin Tetz. See you next time.